Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 115 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, Emerson, and joining me, we have my co-host, Namali.
Hello.
And this week, we don't have as big a news as we had last week, like we had the Dragonflight talents. We have
Yeah.
many smaller topics we're going to talk about. For example, the Fervent Strike changes to Shadowlands keys and what that means.
Yeah.
Mostly, it means your melee not get randomly one-shotting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but other Mythic Plus changes, some trinket updates, and just miscellaneous news. But before we get into that, how's your raid going?
Oh, it's fun. We're in jailer jail.
Yep.
For the probably the foreseeable future. And it's interesting. I already hate the fight, I think. And I hate the fight for the same reason I hated Ajara, which is like I hate line of sight mechanics.
Yeah.
And like it's a cluster of like watching people die as I run around like an idiot trying to get them in line of sight and like losing
Yeah.
connection with the boss. And we also tried like I think we made a mistake for like probably the first 50 or so pulls of like trying to do a six stack of the blood. I think it's like the second blood or
Okay.
third blood soak that you do. I think it's the second one. It's like 240-ish in. Trying to do like a six stack there of the buff and just like literally generally dying or barely making it alive and then dying to like the next tank combo or sorry, the next like
Right.
pull in. So we did make some adjustments late in our raid night on Thursday to that. And then started making some decent progress into phase two. Saw phase two probably like 4 or 5 times with majority of the raid alive, got a little bit of the movement going. Saw one set of blood soaks there, and so that was fun. People not knowing where to point their character is always a good time. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, no, it's interesting. I the room if they did something different with the holes, I would have liked that fight so much. Like it's just that phase one. I got like again, we haven't seen much into phase two. I think we're at like maybe 70% is our best attempt, like 68, something like in there.
Yeah.
Um, but phase one has just been I hate it so much just 'cause of line of sight stuff, so,
Yeah.
um
Um, One of the things that I did that I think helped somewhat with the line of sight issues is I made a diagram that shows where like you're going to be able to see the boss, like where the boss's line of sight is going to be after the
Mhm.
pillars come up. And that is partially so that people know where not to stand to get mind controlled, right?
Oh, yeah.
But also we had people complaining rightfully about where we were positioning the boss and like what the line of sight or lack thereof was.
Mhm.
So we made some adjustments. We made it to Regulon last Sunday, or to through Regulon onto the jailer last Sunday, and I did not have, I guess, detailed enough phase one prep. Like the line of sight stuff got us,
Yeah.
um, but we got there, and then Friday we actually had a wild night. It was so I was in bed all day. I didn't do any prep basically.
Yeah.
Our raid leader uh, had to be out,
Oh, no.
and he found this out like 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, god.
So one of the other officers like did a ton of the heavy lifting, and so we actually still had a pretty good raid night. We made it to phase two, and if not for some like walking into hole shenanigans at the end of phase one, we would have actually made it there with everybody alive.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
We did not successfully six stack the buff while doing that, so
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have been planning to do the six stack, but have yet to successfully execute it.
Yeah.
We always like lose our buff before we refresh, so we'll see how that goes. Um, but yeah, this fight's very rippy. There's just so many things that just like, oh, you're dead now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we
And
had trouble or sorry.
the worst part is like a mind control. You can kill them and then you can res them, and that's okay. When they
Yeah.
fall in the hole and spawn on the far side of the platform, they're effectively removed from the fight. You cannot res them. You could have two reses up and you just can't res them. It's
Yeah,
like
you can't get close.
I remember doing we were doing just for fun eye level synced uh oh what was it? One of the extreme trials from Final Fantasy with people from Brew Lounge.
Yeah.
Titan. In Titan's platform, one of the main things is you get knocked off the edge. And when you get knocked off the edge, your body doesn't come back up. So you can't be resurrected.
Yeah.
So if you died, you were just permanently dead.
Oh God.
And that's what
Yeah.
it feels like with this, where if you fall in a hole, it just puts you back at that fixed spawn point. Like,
Yeah.
really, what it should do is it should put you back up next to the hole you fell in.
Yeah.
That would be the best.
Yeah. No, that would be nice. Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of holes, I mean, we also ran into a fun issue with like the weak aura that we used. Probably everybody uses to tell you what hole to jump in. So like the pizza slice one. Um,
Yeah,
some people and they were like, oh, somebody we had some issues with people like two people jumping in the same hole, and then they like, well, mine said this, mine said that, and so we had a bunch of people turn on Discord streams. We found out that like some of the guys' weak auras like they had the wrong like order. So like when they got the bomb, the order was wrong. But if they didn't have bomb, the order was right because you could still see like where people are going on like the weak that we
oh
use. So it was a very weird bug. So we had like everybody reload the UI, repush the note, and so we lost a couple of attempts, probably like 4 or 5 attempts or something like that, where like
yeah,
it just assigned like the person saw their assignment as wrong, and then of course like our raid leader would be like, "You ran jumped to the wrong hole again," and like our one warlock was like, "It just told me back left." Like I will he's like turned on a stream or whatever. It was so weird. So
yeah,
um, but yeah, no. Other than some weird stuff like that, it's one of those fights where like it I think you need a consistent group and you need a a group that like a group of players that always goes to the same spot for each mechanic. I think that's like the biggest thing is you can't just YOLO your movement or where you stand or what you do. Like there needs to be
yeah,
very like pre-positioned like after like line of sight one and that sort of spread mechanic that comes, I always go to this spot and everybody else goes to the same spot and it doesn't, you don't die, you don't get, you're not like sort of moving all over the place. So um we've been struggling a little bit with that. Got a little bit better late in the night, but we also had like roster issues. We had like two people out that were going to be in. Our
yeah,
raid leader has been he ended up he sort of made the decision to 21st man raid lead jailer, so just so he can call everything out a little bit easier. But he was in the fight because we had roster issues, so it was
yeah.
uh it was a fun night. It's a
We
fun progression boss, I'll say.
we
So
have a bunch of people on vacation various weeks. Like, never enough at one
yeah.
time that we're gonna be like, oh, we're canceling raid tonight.
Yeah.
But also too many to have like a consistent 20 people in every single night.
Oh no. Oh no.
So at least I think we're gonna have a consistent healer comp and a consistent tank comp. So those should
Gotcha.
both be consistent. It's the DPS that are gonna be
Yeah.
shifting all over the place.
Oh no.
It's gonna be a mess. But that's sneaky way to lose progression time is having to swap your comps around. Which we actually
Yeah.
electively like we did rotations on Friday. We had a group of 20 in for the first 2 hours, then swapped people out and had another group in for the last 2 hours. And that's just because we knew we're gonna have to
Yep.
have people swapping anyway in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
So we
yeah, yeah.
might as well get ahead of the curve and just say we're swapping now while it's under our control and we can go through this learning of phase one with everybody in here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh man, that's fun. Um, well, cool. Any other
Oh,
progressions? Oh, sorry.
one final note on the jailer. I have successfully managed to get Niuzao to tank the boss on multiple occasions. I had a
Interesting.
273k invoke Niuzao stomp crit.
Jesus.
I am now lobbying for PI because I am in the top 10 on DPS during the first minute of the fight.
That is hilarious.
This boss is stupid.
God, those
Um,
shenanigans. Yeah.
my co tank was previously a brew main, slash paladin main, and he played Blood DK for us this tier.
Yeah.
But we're talking right now about him switching over and playing double brew on this boss.
Oh.
Uh, and it's not for damage because Blood DK is going to do better damage at the end of the fight anyway. I think um,
Yeah.
mine just looks better in the first minute. Is it's all the right there.
Yeah.
Um, but it is actually I think safer as Brewmaster because Stagger is still very good
Yeah. Yeah. Unless our brewmaster actually got one shot on
on
pull
pull.
the other night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
because he yeah, I think the way they were
egg
doing it or
smash travel time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
Oh, I
exactly what it was.
also so there's a way that you can if you speed taunt the jailer and then throw a keg at him, which is what you would normally do to like get threat, right? Like
Yeah.
you taunt and you would throw the keg so the damage is after the taunt lands, right? If you do that, your keg will miss. His hitbox is so wonky that the keg will entirely miss. It will not refresh your 4-piece bonus,
Oh
which is
god.
significantly less dangerous now, but it will not refresh your
Yeah.
four-piece bonus. It will not do damage. It will not apply the debuff that makes Breath of Fire give the dot with the damage reduction,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it will not give
Jesus.
shuffle.
I don't think he realized that, but yeah, that's exactly what happened. Speed taunt, tag smash, didn't hit, and yeah, fell over
Yeah,
to like a
so
hundred and
yeah,
it was
it.
some ridiculous number.
I'm wearing a cheat death trinket because I'm also spamming sit on pull with invoke out. That's how I got 270k crit.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I definitely had a couple pulls where I threw keg and somebody pulled early, and then I took an auto before the keg landed because I
Oh,
just had to
jeez.
taunt immediately, or they were going to take an auto, and it procced my cheat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, boss hits. Boss hits hard.
Uh huh.
That is for sure. So, well, cool. Well, let's I guess let's move forward a little bit. We'll get into some of the I guess the news for the week, and then we can talk about our main topic, some of the Mythic Plus changes that they made. Um, so first up, I guess this is sort of just a non-WoW thing, but still a Blizzard game thing. Is Diablo 4 beta pre-registration has opened up. So if you want to sign up for beta of Diablo 4, you can just go to diablo4.blizzard.com, log in, sign up, and go from there. And I'm actually excited about this. I don't know how much Diablo you've played,
Played a decent bit
but
of Diablo 3.
yeah, I come back like every other season at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe every third season just to sort of mess around and see what's good, what's not. Game's so good. I think if they based on what they're doing with Diablo Immortal, which I know they're not one to one in terms of like feedback, like in terms of like features and stuff like that, but if they take some of like the MMO or like the open world aspects that are in Diablo Immortal and like drop them in Diablo 4, I think Diablo 4 would be a another fun game. So
Yeah.
um it's
It
very
will
much a
also not be
sorry,
monetized by NetEase,
it's true. That is true. We won't
or
have
at least it
to
better not
pay.
be.
Oh god, that'd be awful. But no, it's beta's up. Beta signups are up for Diablo 4. So definitely check it out. If you're into that stuff. Um so that was the one, I guess, non-WoW thing. Then we get back on the WoW train. Big Dragonflight news. The internal alpha for Dragonflight showed up on the Blizzard catalog. And if you know what this is, like Blizzard publishes an endpoint. It's what their launchers use to download different versions of various clients. So you can publicly see this in the APIs. Um, and they added a record for Dragonflight internal alpha. And so it's very, very new. There's actually I think there's no files behind it other than just an entry for the alpha.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so interesting that alpha. I don't think this means alpha. I've said it's been 2 weeks away for the past month and a half. But I think what this is just going to let people play from home, right? Like, so this is for like their employees to gain access to it.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense.
um,
Work
and
from
then
home people.
this will
Yeah.
eventually then sort of spider around probably what the general public uses to gain access to it. But for now, this is just, um, their ability, their employee ability to gain access to alpha outside of the office. Um, Not naming any sources, but I can tell you that outside of the WoW team, I don't think anybody else has played it or has access to it at Blizzard, employee wise. So we're still
That's
ways away from like
for reference. That's
external alpha.
normally the way that these rollouts go for these alphas.
Yeah.
Is the people on the game are playing the alpha first, then other people in Blizzard Studios, other games, get access to it,
Yep.
and then it rolls out to friends and family, and then it goes out to the broader public.
Yep. Yeah. So this is probably for that studio wide sort of alpha they're launching soon, and then we'll see. Hopefully, friends and family shortly after that, mid July maybe. Actually, no. It's sorry. Yeah. Actually, yeah. Mid July would be my guess at this point. If I was a betting man, about a month from now. So, good news there. In other hot fix news, we can get to the hot fix section of the show. Um, Rated PvP is now available cross realm in North America.
Cross
So if you
faction.
remember, or cross faction, sorry, yeah. So if you remember, they disabled rated PvP from a cross faction perspective at the launch of 9.2.5. And they just now have re-enabled it for NA. I don't know if it EU got enabled. I didn't see a post for Europe, but it's at
I
least live in
think
NA.
it is coming live with restarts,
Okay.
maybe. So like
Yeah, I don't.
this came up on Tuesday.
Yeah,
So
for
maybe
the
maybe
US.
it's up in the EU again? Question mark.
Mhm. Maybe.
Um, shall
I don't
see.
PvP. I
Yeah,
don't PvP, but
apparently it was all like we talked a little bit about the hostility bugs
yeah.
and stuff like that, where things that were like pets and stuff being hostile to you when they were on your team in a cross faction group. That was coming up in PvP and like you know making ranked matches go sideways very fast. Um,
Exactly.
so they turned it off and now they have turned it back on. As far as I know, it's still on and still working, which is great.
Yep. Yeah. So if you want some cross faction in your PvP, you can have that, at least in the rated versions. So, um, well, cool. So a couple other hotfixes in the raid this time. Really the big one, the only one I wanted to talk about was the Ragallon hotfixes. They went live with Tuesday's reset. So he got a 5% health nerf on Mythic difficulty, and then a 15% auto attack damage nerf. Which I don't.
The auto attack damage nerf is a joke.
Yeah, our tank said they could feel it, but I'm like, I didn't notice your health moving too
Any
much. So
less. Yeah, like if
yeah,
I
you're
pull up
still super,
from
yeah,
our
swingy.
kill, I can pull up our damage taken from auto attacks, and it's not high. I mean, it's not low, right? The boss hits
Yeah,
reasonably hard. The problem is the boss hits like every half second or some shit like that.
yeah,
Um,
super quick.
like okay, so the raw damage taken from auto attacks was oh I can't. So the damage taken from auto attacks was 1.2k for me damage taken per second, and obviously there's stagger and dodge and stuff in there because he
Yeah,
attempted to auto me 49 times and only landed a hit 23 times, right? My co-tank, a blood DK, uh, attempted to be autoed 90 times, only got hit 41 times, and the blood DK 4-piece parry doing real work there. But that was
yeah,
also like 4k, and if you look at how much of it they got healed, like it's the real damage source on this fight is corrupted wounds, and they have in the note on this hotfix um, that they're reducing the melees across the board as he does significant tank damage, but they want to avoid altering current strategies around corrupted strikes. They could have nerfed corrupted strikes by 15% and it would not have changed anything about how you
yeah, yeah,
um, like
yeah,
I don't really understand why they went for auto attacks. The auto attacks are not the punch. Like if you screw up something with corrupted strikes, it probably kills you. Um,
yeah,
and nerfing it by 15% maybe doesn't move the needle on that, but the auto attacks definitely don't. So,
yeah,
um, however, the health reduction, uh, I think that after this health reduction, the correct strategy for everybody that's working on this boss now is to six heal it.
yeah, yeah. I just make it super safe. So
Yeah, like we
yeah,
six healed it
yeah,
before that nerf, and we were 12 seconds before enrage, which is like
Yeah.
not a ton of time, but with such a scripted fight, it's not that bad.
Hmm.
With another 5% off its health, I think just everybody should six seal this fight.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. I agree. There's enough damage out there that you can make up that easily. Yeah, particularly if your healers are doing damage. So yeah, it's an interesting nerf. The auto attack nerf is just weird, but I guess yeah. I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking. Particularly on who's giving them feedback to that. I would be
I mean, I think what it is they know that the boss does a lot of damage to tanks, right?
yeah.
And they know that there are some shenanigans with corrupted strikes, where like if you
Right.
fully absorb the hit, then it doesn't apply. And so what they're probably concerned about is some small frequent absorbs, like, a power word shield or something, reaching the point that with stagger, a brewmaster can just fully absorb every one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because if you nerf corrupted strikes too much, that could happen. And that's what they don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So I could see them being concerned about that happening if they nerf corrupted strikes too much. But then they also don't want to, like, if they removed that effect, like the fully absorbed thing, um, Brewmaster would be possible to play on that fight.
Yeah. 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 That's funny. Um well, cool. All right. Well, I guess next up in terms of the just some updates is there was a rash of Mythic Plus just fight updates, I guess. So a lot of damage reductions. They did this last week too. They sort of expanded this to a couple of other sort of fights. So like there's less absorb on Nathander Rimbinder, so the final boss of Necrotic Wake. His sort of absorb shield reduces, or sorry, absorb is reduced by 20%. Some more nerfs in Sanguine depths. They received some last week, some more this week, in terms of just damage reduction on some of the bosses. The big one though that I think most people are kind of excited or should be good is actually the Theater of Pain nerf for Zav. That seismic leap damage,
Yeah,
particularly as you
that's
get into yeah, it's big in terms of just higher keys. Like
yeah,
there was, I know, like I was talking to Meg, one of the Mistweaver Mythic Plus pushers, and from her perspective, like you get to like the 28, 29 type key level, so fairly, I mean, I'd say extremely high.
yeah,
Though that's just a one shot ability, regardless of like the amount of versatility you may stack and even having defensive up. So this
right.
reduction sort of makes it a little less rippy in terms of that. So
Yeah, it's also so the only non-boss nerf here is to the three mini bosses at the top of Spires of Ascension. They
mhm.
all had their health reduced just by 20%, and then Aura of Intimidation, which is the stacking. Wait, which one's that one? Is that the final one? That just pulsing damage that happens from that?
Yep, I believe
Yeah,
so. Yep. Hmm.
that got nerfed by 20%, which is good. Those things sucked. So glad that they are going to be less of a pain.
Hmm.
Going to make that dungeon actually, I would say, quite a bit easier on Fortified than it currently is, because that's the scary part on Fortified right now.
Yep.
And then the other thing for just doing Loki's castigate damage reduction for Executor Tarvold, aka the second boss of Sanguine Depths. Um, I don't know if this is really an issue in high keys because there's so many ways to remove the damage from this ability. But in Pugs, you're not removing the damage from this ability, so it's a very good nerf for people that are just doing Pug keys or keys with a comp where maybe like one person can remove castigate, and if it targets
Hmm.
any of the other three non-tank players, then you're just like you got to eat the damage. So
Yeah.
it's a good nerf.
Yeah. So it'll be nicer in terms of like the highest level. I mean, definitely like your 15s if you're doing those just once a week, right? It'll be easier based on this, but in terms of like where these really come into play is as that scaling gets really high.
Yeah,
Um it lets certain classes, it lets you basically push maybe a key level or two above what you're doing right now
yeah.
at the top end. So
And some of these
um
like castigate that have ways for certain classes to remove the ability. It also helps equalize it between different classes because like that's not a nerf if you're already removing every castigate. Like if you're
exactly.
running two hunters and I don't know what other one could do it like on CD, but like a hunter can feign death basically every castigate. Like as long as they don't get targeted twice in a row, they can feign every one. I think you can turtle ones that you don't if you get targeted twice in a row and you rely on not getting targeted 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
If you get targeted 4 times in a row, you just die and you suck it up and you use
Yeah.
Buras. Um, but they can do every other one. So like for them, it's not really that much of a nerf if your comp is already built in a way that you're not getting affected in the first place. But then it
Yeah.
equalizes things for if you're a Windwalker that can't remove that effect, then this lets you push higher than you could before.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So good changes there just in terms of like, yeah, to your point, like normalizing sort of maybe the power difference between certain classes based on their utility and tools. So um well, cool. So real one final, this is a hot off the presses topic. It's not actually in our notes, but I'm gonna
Oh,
throw this out
oh,
there. So this actually came up. If you guys aren't aware, outside of the realm of just World of Warcraft and sort of Blizzard stuff, um, right now there's like basically like the Summer Games Fest going on, which
okay,
essentially
yeah,
is like the replacement for E3. So
right.
like a bunch of game studios are having their big announcements. The Microsoft one is going on right now as we're talking over this. And one of the components of or one of the games just announced on that Microsoft one is actually Overwatch 2. And
Okay.
so they announced their early access is going to begin this October. So
Ah,
October 4th, they're releasing both for Xbox and PC early access for Overwatch. Along with they did a quick overview of a brand new hero. So there's one new hero coming in called the Wastelander. So Overwatch 2 October this year for early release, early October. So probably a little later in October for general release to Xbox and PC, and a new hero. So other Blizzard stuff. I
awesome.
to be fair for me, the Overwatch, I never really got into it too much. I like the PvE modes where like it's you and a team versus like a bunch of bots, but
Right.
I'm not a big like I wasn't a big Overwatch person. So
Yeah, I have some friends. The only times I've played Overwatch are when friends are into it. And so I have a group of friends that are into it right now. So I've been playing with them. But it's pretty funny being like, I've owned this game since release, effectively. And I have not, like, when you level up in that, uh, you get up to level 100, then you go back to 1 and you gain a star. I have zero
yeah.
stars. I've owned this game since release. And some of the people I'm playing this with now have now eclipsed me in level in
Oh
significantly less
god.
time.
Yeah. That's hilarious. All right. So sorry for sort of throwing them off there, but
Yeah, yeah,
sort of hot off the
yeah.
presses, some cool games coming in.
Awesome,
So
awesome.
yeah,
Overwatch 2 no longer vaporware.
no, it'll be real. Which I don't know what the difference is yet between Overwatch and Overwatch 2. I because everything works in both, but they're releasing an Overwatch 2. So
Yeah. Cool. So one of the big things that has happened over the past week is something that we have been in the tank community asking for since the start of BFA. There's this kind of ability. This is part of our main talk. This is kind of ability called a Fervent Strike after the most noticeable case of this ability in Ataldazar in Battle for Azeroth, um, where one of the just very common trash mobs in that dungeon has this Fervent Strike ability that targets the tank if the tank is in range, and if the tank is not in range, it targets whoever is in range.
right,
And in theory, this is obviously some kind of like anti-kite mechanic, right? Like it's intended for the tank to just not be out of range, because if the tank is out of range, then you're going to lose your melee DPS or your melee healer or just a range that happened to be standing nearby. It's
right,
so common that you just lose a DPS to this mechanic. It's very frustrating. Um, but what it really doesn't take into account, and the reason that these were a problem, is twofold. First, there are just actually Mythic Plus affixes that force the tank to kite.
yeah,
Like, Fervent Strike mechanics mixed with Necrotic is just one of the two had to go. Necrotic's been
right.
nerfed multiple times since then, so it's not as kite-y as it used to be. But there's still, as we'll see, we're going to go through the list of all the different Fervent Strikes that they had in Shadowlands. They've they started removing,
Right.
and there's a ton of them, just a
Yes.
ton. And pre-nerf and um, even current necrotic forces your tank to kite in a way that's going to trigger the "oops, your DPS is dead" mode on these abilities. The
Yeah.
second thing is that most tanks have a melee kick. So when you're grouping up mobs and you need to get a caster in, if you as the tank step out to get a kick, you run the risk of losing a DPS to Fervent Strike. And so just any kind of melee kick or CC, anything like that, if you step out to pick up a mob that maybe was wailing on your healer, then if Fervent Strikes could kill a DPS, it just like these mechanics don't play nicely with how dungeons actually play.
Yeah.
It's honestly kind of shocking to me. Like it's been almost 4 years that we've had to deal with these abilities, and they're finally removing them.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you would even not thinking about like tanking or sorry, about kiting or doing something like that, but even movement like as a pack is dying and you're
Yeah,
moving to the next pack, like
Sanguine is another case where this would happen,
yeah,
where you would have a pack starting to die, so you would have to be moving, and you wouldn't really be like kiting. You wouldn't be out of range of the mobs in a meaningful sense, but
yeah,
you would be out of range of maybe one of these dudes towards the back of the pack, and he would start casting his Fervent Strike and just wall up your DPS, and now you're beating the 5 second penalty timer, and your DPS is running back while the rest finish up the pack. And there's not
yeah,
anything you can really do about that. You can't track the cooldown on every single one of these abilities on every single mob in the pack.
yeah,
And also, you can't leave them sitting in the Sanguine, or you can't sit there tanking with Necrotic up. Um,
exactly.
there's a ton of cases where you just oops, we lost a DPS. It's the worst when it's like at the start of a pull, somebody's hit their CDs and they
Right.
eat a Fervent Strike to the face and die, and then the pulls, like depending on what pull it is, like if it's just a single pack pull, you're probably fine. But
Right.
if you're trying to pull together multiple packs and the DPS just eats shit and dies, um, pull's probably dead.
Yeah, yeah, you're just too far behind at that point. So yeah, I mean, this is a really so I guess we can get into it, but yeah, they're essentially not removing the abilities from the mobs. The way that they're changing this is they're basically giving the abilities a range. So before, a lot of these abilities were melee range abilities, which meant anytime you as a tank were out of melee range, it would, attack its closest target. Um, so the idea is that they're now adding a range component to those. So I think it's 10-yard range for most of them. Which means like as long
Yeah.
as it tanks within 10 yards of the mob, they'll still be an eligible target for the tank buster, which should help your melee. So it's not I think it's a good compromise of, not allowing your tank to literally run halfway across the room and slowly sort of kite these mobs along, but it still gives you
So
some wiggle room.
yeah, I don't think that's really that much of a concern with how threat is. Like threat,
Yeah, that's true.
you're not gonna hold threat if you are kiting, the way that you
Hmm.
could in Legion. So I don't think that's too big of a concern right now. Even with like double Mr. X, if you're playing two survival hunters, you're not gonna be
Hmm.
able to just run all over the place away from the mobs and not actually hit them,
Yep.
while being misdirected. But yeah, there's a lot of these, just a ton of these. So this is from the first set of data mining done by Wowhead. So there's actually a first one that's funny. Beak Slice, the birds in the Ardenweald wing of the other side have this dot that they put on you from Beak Slice. And that had actually a 20-yard range, so it was like an anti-fervent strike. Like it would, if you were out of range, go on a DPS.
Yeah.
But also the range was so big that you it was very difficult to actually outrange without doing the like insane kiting that people were doing in Legion. So you would
Yeah.
run into this situation where you needed to drop your beak slice stacks, and the only way to do that was to actually like fuck off to the far corner of the map effectively to outrange
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And then they'd start beak slicing other people, but it was like taking one of these ones, the real damage comes from stacking the dot. So taking
Yeah.
one, at least in a low key, is perfectly fine, unlike some of these other ones that will just kill people if they go on someone else. And then we've got a couple others. We've got the Haymaker from Tazavesh. that had its cast time increased and its range slightly increased.
Uh-huh.
We had the Shield Bash from, I think this is in Theater of Pain, had its range increased and doesn't do the Fervent Strike anymore. Um, so there's still a number of other mobs that were not uh, initially included in this change.
Mhm.
Um, but there's a bunch of these, just like Beak Slice, Deadly Thrust,
Yeah.
Shred Armor on the Mistveil Matriarch and Miss Eterna Scythe, Haymaker, Shield Bash, and then we got a second round of hotfixes a couple days later that went through. So the Relics Deconstruct, Headless Clients Discharge, which I did not actually know this was a Fervent Strike. These things, the Headless Clients in DOS, they like do
Yeah.
their own thing where they do the spinning and they just follow people around and then they're just out of range of you. I guess that means that they discharge other people instead of discharging the tank. I had no
Right.
idea this was supposed to go on the tank. I thought it was randomly targeted. But there's like
Nice.
just going through this list, there's boss abilities in here. Cytotoxic Slash from the third boss of Plaguefall uh,
Yeah.
is a Fervent Strike ability. So if your tank is running around picking up the spiders that spawn, when
Yep.
she casts this, she can put the dot on a non-tank, and it's a dot. It's probably not going to kill them, but why?
Yeah, no, I don't. It feels like some of these abilities, right? If we think about it, is like it's the I not that I mean like Blizzard, like any company, I bet you it's just like a template, right? Like so they have a
Yeah,
bunch of
I
template abilities,
suspect,
and like they
especially
just
so
pick
they
the Fervent Strike template, right, by
yeah,
accident.
I suspect that a ton of these are them picking the Fervent Strike template ability. Some designer somewhere looked at the lack of kiting in BFA keys and
Hmm.
decided, or the relative lack of kiting compared to Legion, and decided that Fervent Strikes were a great success and said, this is what we're using as our template from now on.
Yeah,
And they just copied and pasted. And
yeah,
that was a mistake. But there's like Plaguefall has 4 of these. Theater of Pain has 5 different
yeah,
Fervent Strike abilities, including some of these. So there's 2 of these on the big, or 3 of these on the big named mobs in the War Wing or whatever it's called.
yeah.
And
Zav is the boss. Yeah,
yeah, Zav's Wing, and those things will one shot people if you don't don't get in range. And some of these also line up with like there's ones where you have to step out because there's like a circle slam on the ground, and if a demon hunter charges back in before you get back in, they can get slammed.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really good change, I'll say, in terms of just like making tanks' lives, like, or at least your group's lives, somewhat easier.
Yeah,
But and still keeping like the range makes sense. Still keeping um like the relative difficulty there of like making sure you keep threat, making sure that like the damage is still out there on the tank. So like healing wise and even defensive wise, like you still have to manage that from a health perspective. So no,
yeah,
it's interesting that they like I don't know, not that every mob needs to be ranged, right? But like the idea of like some of these like very high damage abilities not being considered range, which just some of the silly movement that are that is just even if you
yeah,
just think about like we talked a lot about tanking or moving or things like that, but even if you're like if there's something on the ground and you're shifting out of it, like mobs will take weird paths, put them out of
yeah.
range, and then
And then
you can
they
just
kill
get one
someone.
shot. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that these abilities have never ever in any case accomplished their intended goal of keeping tanks from kiting. The
Yeah.
in BFA, the change that pushed us away from the massive kite meta was the threat change.
Yeah.
And since you had to actually do damage to the mobs to generate threat, you just had to stay there and tank the mobs. Um,
Exactly.
the fervent strikes were never really a part of the equation. They were just a very frustrating element that comes up actually a lot. Like with season 3 in Shadowlands, it's been way less pronounced because of actually just how powerful tanks are right now in terms of
Hmm.
defensive. So you can just sit there and eat stuff to the face, even even in a 20. You just
Yeah.
like pull a pack, eat it to the face, and then move on to the next one. And everybody does so much damage, and the tank is so tanky that you just like time a 20 by pulling one pack at a time and pressing W.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but in season one of Shadowlands, where we weren't that tanky and DPS didn't do that much damage, and you know, learning the hard way which abilities were fervent strikes,
Hmm.
um, was always a negative experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's God. Yeah. It's always tough to yeah, with that type of stuff. So but these are, I mean, in general, good changes. I think I guess the other thing to note too, as we sort of talk about this, is they've also made these updates to some of the season, I guess four, they're calling it season four new dungeons. So like Grimral Depot, Karazhan, Mechagon
Right. So the reason these
also
are called
receive these updates.
fervent strike abilities is actually they didn't really exist prior to Italdazar. Um, it was just a part of the game. If you were out of range for a spell and they wanted to cast a spell on you, they just wouldn't cast the spell.
Right. Yeah.
Um, they wouldn't they wouldn't pick another target. The only exception is actually auto attacks. If you
Hmm.
root, and you can still see this happen, if you root a mob, it will attack whoever it can within range. Which,
Hmm.
you know, usually if you're a mage and you press Frost Nova, it means you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so what's happening with these other abilities in like Grimrail Depot or Karzan is not the turning off the Fervent Strike piece of it. It's increasing the range so that they can more reliably cast on the tanks even when the tanks are slightly out of the melee range.
Right. Right. Yeah, which is I guess they're getting ahead of it, right? Like I think the
Yeah.
idea now is they have a different I don't think they've actually Blizzard hasn't posted anything on this just yet. Officially, but it seems like from just a design philosophy perspective, they're testing out this sort of now making these tank buster abilities or fervent strike abilities like have a range, like not getting rid of them, but giving them a range so that you
Yeah.
sort of remove, the random one shots of your DPS
Yeah, they've got
players, right?
developers notes attached to both sets of hotfixes. So the first
Oh,
one
do they?
says,
Oh,
yeah, the first one says, with the following hotfixes, our goal is to address circumstances in Shadowlands dungeons where enemy spells could be cast on nearby melee targets when their current target moved out of range, sometimes leading to unfair player deaths, which is exactly what would
gotcha.
happen, right?
Right,
It's
right, right.
all the time. And in the second one, it says, in the second batch of updates, we've addressed more circumstances, blah, 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 which could sometimes lead to unfair deaths or encourage groups to avoid bringing melee DPS entirely. So yeah,
Gotcha.
it's which
That's
that was a
directly
way to
related,
solve
yeah.
this. If you didn't bring any melee and you didn't bring a melee healer like a Mistweaver or a Paladin, then
Yeah.
you couldn't trigger these effects.
The only person in range would be the tank at that point, and then 0 people in range, right? If the
Yeah, and
tank
so
was
they wouldn't
fighting,
cast on
so
anybody.
yeah. Yeah, that's God, that's an awful way to look at it, in terms of, that, but no, I this is like I said, to be fair, at the key levels I do, never really was an issue, right? Like, the damage wasn't enough like, definitely people would get chunked, but the damage wasn't high enough that you get one shot in many cases,
Yeah.
so for me personally, I understand the change, it's great, but I don't know if people really realize most of this, if they're not really pushing sort of like the 18, 19, 20s, right, where this becomes much more deadly. 'Cause I think in the 15
Even
range,
I mean, even in 15s in season one, these would one shot people. These would one
that's
shot
true. Yeah,
DPS.
early on. Yeah,
Like season three, you're absolutely right. Season three, they don't. In
yeah,
a 15, they're not going to one shot a person that's like reasonably.
yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. Um, but no, yeah, I think awesome, awesome fervent strike changes. So,
This has been
um,
such a long time coming. It is very nice, and it's also encouraging about Dragonflight, right?
yeah,
Because this
exactly.
means
Yeah,
that they are not going to put these abilities in Dragonflight.
yep,
um, and that's just great because these abilities are the most anti-fun thing in dungeons. It's just like you didn't do anything wrong, but we're gonna kill one of your group members anyway. Don't you like
exactly.
keys?
Don't you like keys? Yeah, no, yeah, it's definitely it is interesting. Or sorry, it's good set of changes. Good set of changes. So,
Yeah.
um, so cool. Anything else on the fervent strike stuff before we do this? this little tank trinket update, which I thought we talked about maybe, but
We did talk a little
uh,
bit about it. There's been so we can, I guess, jump right into that.
yeah.
So we're talking about Codex of the First Technique. So what this trinket is, it drops from streets, from the last boss there. Technically, if you're doing the normal non-mythic plus version of the dungeon,
Hmm.
um, it basically has a proc that will
Yep.
give you a buff, and while you have this buff, it absorbs 10% of the damage that you take and reflects that damage back to whatever hit you. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Slight problem. It used to, this is not how it works anymore, but it used to also affect environmental damage or damage without a source, which environmental damage is. It would also affect personal damage, so damage you did to yourself, like stagger. And so what would happen is that damage doesn't have a source, so it didn't know where to reflect the damage, but it would still reflect it to whatever you were currently targeting.
Yep.
So this is something that caused a quite large number, I would say, of keys to get totally ripped by someone pulling a pack accidentally by targeting a mob, just tab targeting while Codex was up. You know, having a dot ticking on them or a stagger ticking on them, and the mob just
Yep.
then pulls the pack and wipes your key. So that had ways that it could be abused. I know for a fact that there were people that would use it to pull stuff through walls and miss a Tierna Scythe because there was no line of sight check. You could actually, if you could target it, you could do this anywhere. Like anywhere you could target things through a wall, you could pull
Yep.
it because it didn't check line of sight before doing damage. Um, and uh, so what would happen is they would use this basically be a brewmaster. You always have stagger ticking that always triggers on whatever you target, and you pull stuff through walls.
Yep.
So obviously there's like some abusive behavior there of like using this trinket to do pulls that shouldn't be possible. And then also some real negative consequences for not knowing the bugs with this trinket where you accidentally wipe your key because you just like pull a pack from halfway across the instance and they bring 3 packs of friends with them and you can't handle that and you die.
Yeah.
Um so this trinket got 2 changes, undocumented changes, in 9.2.5. The first one was that they made it so it no longer reflects damage without a target. So if you take environmental damage or stagger damage, it is no longer reflected at all. It will still get absorbed, but it will not be reflected. Um, which is at least for Brewmaster, a very noticeable damage to the trinket. Just that by itself, no other change to the trinket is around a 40% nerf to the damage that you get from the trinket because of how much damage you would get from it reflecting stagger.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah. Um, so you can still high roll with this trinket. Like the one of the reasons that people love this trinket, it's a bad trinket. Don't wear it. It was bad before this. It's bad now. Don't wear it. Is because you could high roll it. You could have it line up. It could proc exactly when you're taking a ton of damage, and as a result, do a ton of damage. That comes with the downside of it. It can proc while you're not taking very much damage. While
Yep.
using Rygolon as an example, because Rygolon is like the highest tank damage boss, right? It could proc while you're actively tanking the boss, going into a gravitational collapse, and you could just have an absolute monster proc of Codex of the First Technique because you just lined up with all the damage that you're taking.
Yep.
Or it could proc immediately after your co-tank picks up the boss from you, and you just sit there like having small amounts of ticking damage for the next 15 seconds until you pick the boss back up, and the proc could do effectively nothing. So it's a very high variance trinket. It's one that has very, very, very high highs and still does have high highs. You can look at ranks from Brewmasters from 9.2.5, and this trinket does show up still in top ranks because it has the ability to high roll to such an extreme degree compared to other trinkets.
Right.
But in the average case, it's awful. In the average case, it was like not great, but still like the high roll was high enough that you still get away with it, like still justify using it in 9.2. But with
Mhm.
the change to how it interacts with stagger, you can't. And I don't think they're reverting this change. I think this change is permanent because I do think that they have correctly identified that A, the way people were using this trinket to pull stuff through walls was bad, and B,
Right.
the
Yeah.
way that people were accidentally ripping their keys by pulling other packs with this trinket was also bad. And there's other ways that they could fix that that would restore the stagger functionality, but effectively what was happening is that stagger was double dipping with Codex because it would
Mhm.
reflect the pre-stagger damage, and then it would reflect the damage taken from stagger.
Oh, okay.
So it was
It
actually
would
double dipping.
interesting. So okay, so it would reflect. That's I didn't realize that was the interaction with Brewmaster. So it would reflect the hit unmitigated by stagger, and then also the ticking stagger damage.
Yes.
So you basically get the stagger damage for free.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's huge. The second change is they reduced the absorb. Let me see if I can find the exact number. Uh, the do no. Okay. Basically, they reduced the way the trinket works is it has a cap per individual hit that you get that on how much damage gets redirected or absorbed. Um, and this did scale, and it got broken. So effectively, what happened is it was like you were all wearing a minimum eye level version of the trinket. The amount that it would reflect from any individual hit was capped at like 2,000,
Yep.
which like Brewmaster's already eating a 40% hit to the damage of the trinket. Now everybody eating another massive amount off of the trinket's values. This one did get fixed. They did
Right.
hot fix the trinket to restore the scaling. So at least for if you look at like a blood decay, they're still going to get roughly the correct amount of damage.
Yeah.
But for example, on Regalon, there's a bunch of environmental damage that is now no longer going to get redirected even for a blood decay, not just a Brewmaster thing. So it's still an effective nerf in a lot of scenarios, um, but not a huge one the way it is for. However, Shrink has been very, very controversial in like the tank community because there's been this feedback loop of like people doing very, very high keys and people getting like high ranks on logs on Regulon specifically using this
Yeah.
trinket. The other people going, oh, they're using this trinket. It must be a good trinket. I'm going to use that. And then using it, and it just dramatically underperforming because the trinket scales with the amount of damage that you take.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So basically it's one of the it's like another like yeah, like it's just tanks gaming the system that is like taking more damage as the trinket procs to basically up the amount of damage the trinket will
There's
do.
there's that, but there's also like a 30 does more damage than a 15, right? Like by a lot.
Oh
So
yeah,
you
that's
look at
true
a
too, yeah.
streamer that's like a big key pusher, they're wearing Codex in a plus 28, right? It's actually prior to 9.2.5 actually would be probably very good, one of the best options because it's a
Yeah.
plus 28 and they're getting absolutely trash canned. And basically at any point that trinket procs, it's going to do huge damage.
Right. Yeah.
Your 15 is not like that. Your 15 is doing like 10% of the damage that a 28 does. And so when you wear this trinket, you're just you're losing a ton of value that you could get by wearing literally anything else. Not literally anything. It's a real bad trinket expansion, but but wearing
Yeah.
a lot of other trinkets. There is a tool that got built that I can't pull up because I don't have any logs with Codex on it because I don't have a Codex. Um,
Yeah.
but which does a analysis of how much damage you would have done with Codex versus any other trinket. You give it a log and it just tells you, okay, how much damage would you have gotten from Codex versus another trinket? And um, almost every single time, you would get more damage from another trinket.
Gotcha.
It's not until like Rygalon sometimes would give you more damage from Codex, especially as like a Blood DK, which takes a lot of unmitigated hits.
Mhm.
Brewmaster, the same thing prior to the stagger change. Um, so there was like one specific boss that it was worth using Codex on for two
Yeah.
classes, and that was Rygalon. And it is definitely not worth using in the average case now. If you're so there's this thing that people in the Final Fantasy community do, the parsing community, where they will do crit runs, crit farming, where they
Uh-huh.
will run. There's no lockouts in Final Fantasy, so they can just run the same dungeon or the same boss over and over again,
Okay.
and they will keep running it over and over and over and over and over and over. Try and farm better crits.
Interesting. Interesting.
So if you get a crit on like your big finisher ability or whatever, that's obviously like way better than getting a crit on whatever auto attack, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
they'll run it to try and get better luck with crits. And there are logs from the previous expansion. There was somebody that ran the first boss of the last tier there over 400 times farming crits.
Interesting.
That's the kind of scenario now that
That's
you would wear
crazy.
Codex in. That's what you would
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
Codex for. It's for fishing for good procs to YOLO your way to rank 1 by like
Yeah.
playing okay and having Codex do just like stupid damage by getting extremely lucky.
Yeah.
But if you're progressing Rygalon right now, do not wear this trinket. Like under any circumstance. Wear a different trinket. You would be better off wearing like if you've got a scale, this is one of the a lot of raid bosses scale from DOS is not particularly good. On Rygalon it's actually like fairly compelling because of the way it removes you can use it to reset your stacks of corrupted wound because you can
Gotcha.
fully absorb the hit. And that is super super good. So like take it off, put on a different trinket. Like you've got other trinkets, don't wear Codex.
That's
Um,
so funny.
and if you do still see like streamers and high end key pushers wearing this dungeon, know that it's a different world in a plus 30.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, and I think you point to that where it's like, yeah, you need to take a ton of damage for this to do a bunch of damage. That's why you
Yeah,
see the top end do it, and then also like I think you also have probably a similar thing of like high rolling it, right? Like getting a proc
yeah,
when you're taking that damage is also like key to
right,
those parses. So
right. And
that's
so
great. That's great. I'm
it
sorry.
can proc from any instance of damage that you take, right?
Uh huh.
A lot of raid bosses have just environmental ticking damage going out basically all the time. Um,
Right. Yeah.
So even if you're not actually tanking the boss, you can still have the trinket trigger. Like imagine something like I guess the Raglan example again. Somebody takes the boss off of you. Quasar triggers. There's the damage event from that, and
Yep.
Codex triggers. You're not tanking. You're not taking a ton of damage. Trinket proc is just wasted, and it doesn't trigger
Nice.
that often. The proc rate on it. Let me pull up. The buff duration is 12 seconds long, which is
Hmm.
conveniently short enough to uh, fit in between tank swaps, even on Regalon, which is a very frequent tank swap fight.
Hmm.
Um, it is 2.5 procs per minute, roughly. So
Okay.
in a 5 minute fight, right, you're looking at 12 to 13 procs. If you have one that gets wasted, you're looking at losing like 8% of your trinkets damage. If you have two that get wasted, you're losing 15-20% of your trinkets damage.
Yeah.
It's it's that's why it's high variance.
Right, yeah. So tough. Yeah, I think the other interesting thing too about all this is that all of this was undocumented, right? Like there
Yes.
hasn't been a post at all by Blizzard, right? About these
Yes.
changes, about any of the stuff going on in the trinket. Yeah, which is it, maybe that's the other side of this too, is like that's always the annoying part I'll say about when Blizzard makes changes and doesn't say anything. It's just you don't know, like, we don't I guess you don't know why. I mean, I'm assuming the why here is just that they didn't like the fact that you could pull things, right? Like, through walls. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's maybe the biggest one, and then the scaling one, maybe they didn't like the fact that you could high roll it as well, because it is a dungeon
I mean
trinket,
the
but
scaling stuff did get nerfed. or
Yeah.
reverted. So it's back to the way it used to be.
Okay,
Um,
okay. But yeah, I mean, I guess the damage part of it's just it's a weird thing to not even come out and say it, right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
'cause I think that's the one thing I think Blizzard sometimes, I don't know, they need to do more of is just like communicate changes like this. Even if it like if you weren't a part
yeah,
of maybe the high end community and realized why they were using this trinket or what people were doing with this trinket, you don't understand why it was nerfed, right?
yeah,
Or you may not you may not be able to take advantage of it, and, like, the fact that they don't come out and at least say this just leaves the whole fun of, like, figuring out what they actually changed and, like, what it does and what it means to, like, the
yeah.
community to, like, sort of guess. It's, like, similar to, like, the Fallen Order changes for, like, Mistweaver and Haste and stuff like that, and,
Right.
like, the fact
Yeah.
that, like, they talk all about the fact that, like, haste affects Fallen Order. We saw no, like, instance of it until we could start stacking enough haste to, like, see a noticeable difference. Um, and then it's all
Yeah.
the fun of, like, having a breakpoint, which is, like, so stupid, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know, like, this sort of bothers me a little bit in terms of, like, whenever they do changes like this, it's just unless somebody, like, figures it out and, like, is watching closely, it's sort of a I feel like this is maybe one of those things where like somebody random in Discord was like in a Discord channel for tanks was like, "Hey, I noticed something weird with this trinket," and then like a bunch of people are like, "No, nothing's changed." And one person maybe takes a look at it, like, "Oh man, this is different. Like, what's going on here?" And so, then like
You know,
nobody realizes it. So
it got noticed fairly quickly because uh the damage of this trinket got absolutely
yeah,
dumpstered the day of the patch,
I guess
right?
in this case it's a little bit easier to notice if it's
Right?
forty
Like
percent
when
reduction. Yeah,
right, for brewmasters immediately after the patch it would have been something like 60 or 70% reduction between
yeah,
the nerf to the absorb size and the nerf to the stagger interaction.
that's crazy.
Um
That's crazy.
so yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah,
and to kind of cap everything off with this trinket, it's the kind of effect that is honestly like it's neat to think about, but hilariously awful to play with in practice. Because what it
right.
incentivizes is doing super degen things, take more damage. Like you were referencing earlier, like what I'm
Yeah,
doing, Invoke Neozao for Brewmasters has the same kind of effect. You take damage, you deal damage.
yep,
There's no cap on Invoke Neozao. Well, the cap is your health bar. You don't die, you're good. Um, So what that leads to is like on pull on jailer right now, I use sit in order to take increased damage during my invoking Zao.
right.
And
Yeah.
it's worth it. Like I have hit close to 30k DPS in my opener. Because if you get Niuzao stomp
Easy.
crits with huge amounts of purified damage in it, it's just an insane amount of damage.
Right, yeah.
And it's actually relatively safe in that specific scenario because I'm playing around it in a way where I know I don't need that cooldown later, so I use it there, have it back my
Right.
hand. But um, it's in general like if you wanted to like max parse on that boss, you would do that every single time you had Niazawa up, not just in the first 15 seconds of the fight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I talking to more tanks, it reminds me of MOP a little
Mm-hmm.
bit
Mm-hmm.
and like what was the
It's
ability? It was
exactly what it is. Resolve.
Resolve, yeah, where like I remember doing what boss was it? It was the last boss in Hellfire, not Hellfire.
Um,
Black is
Siege
it
of Orgrimmar.
Blackhand? Yeah. Where you'd like go to the different worlds or like different scenarios, right, to fight the Shah. And like at the end of each one of these worlds, there was a Shah that did our frontal. And I remember our tanks would literally you could dodge it. It would always point at one player and you'd have to get out of it. But our tanks would sit in it to max out their resolve to then do more damage during that
Yeah,
phase. And it's like it's that all over again. And so instead of like saving
yeah,
cooldowns for like taking big hits, you intentionally take big hits and use your cooldowns there to then like get more damage. So
yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's I to be fair, like I just don't I, for me, I'm just old, I guess. I hate that sort of play style, but I see why people, particularly
It's
tanks, enjoy it. Yeah.
I don't like it. I
Okay.
don't like it. It is neat to think about. It is neat in theory. Like, oh yeah, if you're taking tons of damage, you get to do more damage. Oh yeah, that's so cool. Except for the fact that how much damage you take is largely under your own control.
Right. Yeah.
So all it takes is somebody going, oh, 2 plus 2, I can survive this if I press send meditation. Aha.
Exactly. Exactly. And then
Uh,
I'll do a ton of damage right afterwards. It'll be
yep.
great. I'll get, I'll
So
be number 19 on the list instead of 20. Awesome.
the saving grace of Invoke Nuzao, the only reason that it is not as degenerate as it would otherwise be, is that it is tied to stagger, and stagger is tied primarily to physical damage, and
Okay.
most
Yep.
raid mechanics are magic damage. So you are
Interesting.
relatively limited in what you can do with it. But
Gotcha.
there are certain, like, this is where like sitting comes in on the jailer, right? So the main source of physical damage on that fight is his auto attacks on the tank,
Mhm.
and you can dodge those, but you don't want to dodge them while you have Invoke Nizao up, because dodging them means you don't get to feed damage to Dave.
Oh God. Yeah.
So you sit. You can also back tank it, but sitting has a second advantage.
Get
Advantage.
crit.
Real big air quotes here. Real big air quotes on advantage. You can get crit
Yeah.
while you sit,
Are they
which
still call those
doubles.
crushing blows?
No,
Crushing
no,
blow? No, not anymore. Oh,
it's an
okay.
actual crit. It turns off your crit immunity.
Oh, that's interesting. That's funny.
Um,
Yeah.
which then
So
doubles the
degen.
damage you get to feed to Dave, as long as it doesn't kill you. Which you're a brewmaster, you have stagger. It would have to basically turn off stagger for it to kill you from a single hit.
Yeah. Yeah. God. Yeah. It's just I don't know that part of the game. I agree. It's interesting to think about. It's just like so degenerate and like
Yeah,
yeah. I don't know.
it's it makes like brewmaster rankings really frustrating as well when you look at like the rank one on Guardian of the First Ones last tier for
Yeah.
brewmaster had like 800,000, a million stomp damage.
Yeah.
And if you were playing legit and not like sitting during your Invoke Nizao, you were getting like 200,000, maybe 250 to 300,000.
Yeah.
So somebody like cheesing Invoke Nizao is literally getting triple the value from the cooldown that you are. And the
Yeah.
cooldown's
Exactly.
already doing 10% of your damage when you're not cheesing it. You can't
Yeah.
really go for like high ranks as a brewmaster unless you're doing dumb things with Nizao. Like you
Yeah.
can go
Which
for like
is
a top 20 rank, but top 10 by the time you get this deep into a tier is typically just the 10 people that have done the most degen things with Invoke Nizao.
yeah. That's true. That is true. Oh man. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It's just it's a weird it's a cool thing to think about I think, but just not something that
Yeah,
I participate in. It's the same thing with people like from a healer perspective, you can think of the same thing as like healers doing a bunch of damage and it's like why doesn't our 4 piece increase our damage or like why doesn't why like what's the best DPS rotation or DPS trinkets? Like most healers have like 3 DPS buttons. The rotation is like you hit
yeah,
one all the time and then maybe you hit another one that has a cooldown in the middle, right? Um and so it's yeah, that part of the conversation interesting to think about. I'm not a huge fan of it. So um in terms of like
yeah,
playing into that type of stuff. So um, but cool. I don't. I was like I think we started at the top of the episode. There wasn't a ton to talk about this week. We're sort of in a little
yeah,
bit of a content like we're sort of in our jailer slog fest of progression um
yeah,
and there's not a ton of news coming out of Blizzard at least right now. The Fervent Strike stuff we talked about today I think is really cool. Sets us up for a fun season 4.
yeah.
Um, whenever that's coming out, but
The
not
fun
too
thing
much. So I
is
don't know if
there's two fervent strikes in the Tazavest dungeons. I don't think there's any in Mechagon, and there's none in Karazhan and none in the WoD dungeons. So they're removing all of these just in time for it to all go away.
yeah, exactly. Well,
Well, just in time. We probably have a couple more months of season 3, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. At least for a little bit longer, and then it'll be season 4, and it'll be crazy town. feel like USA with what's
Yeah,
gonna happen there with all the different changes and stuff like that. So
yeah.
um
But this might end up just being a relatively episode today.
yeah, I think so. I don't wanna hold people here. I don't want us to just ramble on for
We
the
could
next like
definitely ramble on. Like if we
yeah, for
wanted to
next like
ramble on, we have those 3-hour episodes to prove it.
oh god, yeah. Yeah. Plus I think there's a ton of that games festival stuff coming out. So
I saw
Bethesda
there's
just did
another
a
new Overwatch champion revealed.
yeah, the
The Junker Queen.
Widowmaker? Yeah, yeah.
Junker
Forget
Widowmaker's an
something
interesting
W.
one. You definitely
Yeah,
haven't played.
there's a W one. They also did a huge D4 reveal. So like we talked about the fact that I wanted to see an
Oh,
open world, and they announced that it'll be open world with like raid bosses and stuff like that, or like world boss and stuff like that in it. Um so yeah, so a bunch of information coming out. They also made a tweet too, which I don't know how much you take this into account, but D4 at least monetization wise, they will have a shop, but it'll be nothing but cosmetic items and then full expansions in the shop. So base game, full price, all in there. So yeah, some interesting, some cool games. There's a huge my Twitter feed right now is going crazy about Starfield, which is the Bethesda it's like the new Skyrim, but it's space Skyrim, I guess you
Space
could
Rim.
say. Yeah, so it's the new Skyrim, or what's their other IP that Bethesda is? Did they do the Fallout games too?
Yeah,
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 yeah. So it's like their new world that they're building um, for Starfield. So Starfield was announced, I think, like 3 or 4 years ago, and now they've done a full reveal of some more details, some better details about what it's actually going to be. So,
yeah.
um, but yeah, all coming out of Microsoft. I forget Microsoft owns all those studios.
Yep.
They're about to own Blizzard, they own
They're gonna be
Bethesda.
the Disney of games.
God, there's gonna be just like there's only like what is it? There's 5 media companies in the world. There's gonna be like 4 game companies in the world at
Yeah.
the end of this. So
At least
but
we'll
cool.
always have indie games.
Event maybe, maybe. There's not many indie movies anymore. So at least big
Movies,
ones.
I mean, I feel like it's far more difficult to make a movie by yourself
That's
than it
true.
is to make a game by yourself, just due to the nature of like, if you're talking at least like live action movie, right? You
Yeah,
need
yeah.
multiple people involved that can act.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
so games you don't need that, but also games are maybe a little bit like the umbrella is a bit broader. Like if you talk narrative storytelling, obviously people do things by themselves all the time, all the books.
Yep.
Um,
Fair, fair enough. That's
but
fair.
yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
All right.
Um
Well, I think that is going to bring us to the end of our show for today.
that
Thank you all
works.
for watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed this show and you want to support all the work that we do over at the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, we would invite you to come and join the Discord. It is a great place to come and hang out. Maybe
Oh, yeah.
react to some of these Summer Game Fest announcements,
Yeah.
and or whine about how it's not PoE, so you don't like it.
God. Oh, yeah,
Shots
that's true.
fired. Shots fired.
That's oh God,
Um,
yeah.
but that is going to be it for our show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.